Okay, I mentioned earlier that if there's a common challenge that many of the groups are having, I'd do a little bit of a recording, hopefully to be of help to everyone. So this is to do with the containing an entire profile for a client. Your choices are do that right in the identity system. We looked at doing that last term where we could add additional properties to the application user, but many students find that's a very complex approach because then you have to modify all the scaffolded boilerplate views and so on for registering and maintaining the user information. So I've suggested to a few groups that you can actually get away quite nicely with having just your own client, user, whatever, table entity, and relate it informally to a degree, because you don't actually necessarily have referential integrity. You don't really require it. It's a 99% good solution even without referential integrity. We get a little spoiled with relational databases having that all the time. But if it's done properly, it's quite good and a workable solution. So what I did is I came over here to our lab files, went into the project from last term, just to use a familiar one to start with, grabbed this good solution here to our Art House Part 5. So I have that up here. And so what I've done is I've laid the groundwork for a few things. Now, this isn't maybe the best example, but hey, it's a working MVC, so we can use it. So again, the scenario is we already have the identity system, just stock as it is, as it comes out of the box, so to speak. So we have the username, which actually, of course, the way it's set up by default is also the email address, that huge GUID type ID and so on. Well, we don't have to worry about that. The fact is, once a user is logged in, authenticated, then they have the username, which is by default the email address. So we can relate that to our own table, our own entity for, well, I'll call it client in this case because the student was just here asking me questions. That's what they were calling it in their system, right? So I've added a new class here for client. And basically, what does it have? Just the usual culprits here. I have my two full name and formal name based on first, middle, and last names, right? So this is all out of the standard approach. I have a phone number and, of course, an email address. Now, I probably don't even need quite all these annotations. Critical thing is I do want the size set to 256 because in our identity system, the email or the username is a nvarchar 256, right? Another key thing I've added here is, of course, a unique constraint, right? I don't want to have two people with the same email address. I don't have full referential integrity, but that's a logical step that I can put in place to make sure that I have a one-to-one correspondence between the users in the identity system, the application users, and my client profile information, so to speak, inside of this class, right? So other than that, it's pretty much standard. These are just, as I said, the usual summary properties for full name and formal name, just in case I want to access that in code, right? Integer identity ID, just called client. No navigation properties because it's just a standalone little class on its own. Okay, so nothing really too outstanding in there. I'll just close that for now. So of course I did a migration and whatnot. Maybe we should bring that up and show you a couple things in here. So add client was the last migration I did. So that just creates the client table pretty much exactly as you would expect from our class itself. And notice, of course, we're adding the secondary index for a unique constraint on the email field, right? So that was all that was. And one other thing while we're here in the DAL is in the Art House entities then, I actually added a DB set for the clients, right? Okay, just standard stuff so far, nothing fancy or special in particular. All right, so then what I've done is I've gone into the login partial, right? So in case you're a little fuzzy on this, let me just come down here to views and shared, right? So that's where this guy lives. This is the one that appears in usually by default the upper right corner there on the nav bar. By default it shows the username, uses the claims system to get username and displays it there for you to click on it and so on. So I made a little bit of a modification. You know, you'll have the original code in front of you. I don't have it here because I just closed the other project. But basically all I did is I added a little drop down aspect, right? So instead of just having the username there as a link, Normally it said hello and then showed the email address for the user. I've just added a little bit of a drop down saying the username dash menu, right, with two choices. This is basically the original action link that was already here, right? So this calls the manage controller, the index action. I did change the text here because I don't needed to say hello and show the email address again, because I already have that basically up top. So I'd say change security settings. So that will take you to the default view that allows you to change password, and many of you have already modified that one because you don't really want to you're not doing two-factor authentication, other things that just clutter up the screen. I didn't take time to make that change, but I'm sure many of you have. Anyway, that's the default link that was here. So I've just kind of wrapped it inside of this drop-down menu, and notice what I've done is I've added a action link here called manage profile. Right? So the idea is that we're going to maintain the profile, all the other information about our registered users, in a separate area rather than adding them to the application user. So I added a client's controller. We'll go have a look at that in a moment here. So that's all this link does, is it goes to the client's controller. But notice that I'm bypassing index, because really managing the profile is going to be strictly done for whoever is logged in. There's no need for the index view to list all of them. That is something that you might want to think about, perhaps for an administrator to be able to maintain profiles or go in and edit profiles on behalf of users and things like that, possibly even deleting them. But I would suggest doing that, creating a totally separate controller for that administrative aspect. For now, this client's controller that I'm referencing here is strictly designed to work with one profile at a time, right? So that's why we're going to the details of the client's profile. So that's all the real change here in our login partial. Okay, all this code will be back up on the lab file share in a few minutes as well. So I'll just close that for now. So let's look at my client's controller. So I started off with the default arrangement. Now let me point out, I have not added in all the try catches that you should do for proper database error handling. But to get this done quickly so I can get the recording out and also leave it less cluttered, the code, I've more taken stuff out than put anything in. So all that good error handling is not here just yet. But let me just talk about what I have done. First of all, I've just put it so that the entire controller is only accessible to people who are logged in. Makes sense, because the idea of this particular client's controller is just to maintain the information for whoever is logged in, right? Their profile. Now I didn't remove the index, although I don't plan on using it at all. So what I've done is I left it here because of the default routing. System looks for, if you don't say otherwise, it looks for an index action when you just reference a controller. So just as a bit of a safety net, all I've done is I've done my redirect to action going to details. Okay, so that's all that is. So let's focus on details here now. So what I have here, you'll notice I've changed at the beginning. I've taken out that nullable integer for the ID, right? Because I don't want to work with, passing in a parameter for the integer ID for anybody. This controller is strictly going to work with whoever is logged in. So you notice my link query, instead of using .find, I'm using a .where, where the email matches user.identity.name. Right? So whoever's logged in, I'm going to bring up their information, their client object, so to speak. Now, if it's null, in other words, I haven't created the profile yet, I haven't created a record in the table for clients yet, then I'm going to redirect right away to create. Right? So if they try to come here and look at their profile, there is no profile, I'll go to the create. Right? Otherwise, we return the view for the details, for the one and only person who is logged in, identified by that. Okay, so that's why this is how we're getting away with the fact we don't have a foreign key referential integrity constraint, but we're only going to allow records here where the email matches. Okay, all right. So let's talk about the create then. Here in the view, well, this is standard, right? Just returns the create view, which was scaffolded as I added the controller. So what's different here? Well, not much. I mean, I'm still using this bind here for the create. It was there. I didn't take it out. So the only real change I made here was when I'm successful, when I've saved changes, I redirect back to details, right? Why go to the index and get bumped over to details? I'm just going back to the details. Because remember, this controller is only focusing on one client profile, if you want to call it that, at a time, right? Of course, if there's a model state error as we create, like we leave out the last name or something like that, then we just return back again showing the error messages as usual, right? Okay, now edit, the same thing. I don't pass any parameter in, okay, because I'm not going to do it that way. I'm always going to select the client to edit here, identified again by user identity.name. By the way, I know .find is faster in general, but the fact that our where clause here is based on a field, the email field has a unique index, so that index actually speeds up retrieval, right? So it's actually very, very fast pulling up data this way as well. Okay, so again, if they're not null, well, you know what I could do is redirect to, but you know, this should never happen, right? I shouldn't try to edit it, so I'm just going to show not found. What I could also do is just redirect again to create. Kind of an afterthought. I probably should change that. So here, I'll just steal this line of code and do this change while we're here, right? So if I try to edit and there is no such record, then I will redirect back. Oop. Sorry. My mouse on this a little funny sometimes. I'll redirect back to the create. Okay, otherwise we return the view for editing the client. We selected the client based on the logged in user. Alright, so in the post for edit, remember the whole controller is protected with an authorize attribute specifying that they must be logged in, right? So here we just get the data entered in the form. Notice that the email address will be in there, right? We've tucked it away inside. I could have actually just artificially added it to the client in here from, again, user.identity.name, but I think it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. So if the model state is valid, we basically update, right? We set our entity state to modified, save changes, and then I redirect back to my details. And that's all there is to it. Then I've taken out the whole delete, because I'm not going to delete, and so on from this controller. Alright, so now there were, of course, views created with this. So let me bring up the views, because there's some things I did in here. So if I go to the views for client, I didn't touch index because I'm not really using it. I'm only always redirecting away from it. But let's go to details. This is kind of the main one because we always are coming back here. So I've just, changed the header here a little bit. Profile for, might as well show that full name there. See, it makes me feel good that we actually included that. And basically this is just displaying the data, right? Other than that, that's all good. Now at the bottom here, I've just modified, there's no point going back to list because I never use that. So I just have an action link to edit the profile, right? I'm just calling edit. Remember, we don't pass a parameter for who to edit because we're always going to filter and only offer to edit the logged in user. So that's basically the only real change here is just a bit of the stuff at the top and then that link at the bottom. Now the edit and create, okay, remember we go to the create if there is no record yet, right? If we go to look for them, filtering by their user, their email address, part of the user.identity.name, and they aren't there, then we come here to create. So create client profile. What I've done here, notice I've just added right here with plain old almost HTML, inside the form, I've just added a hidden input type, right? Name is email, value, it gets it right from the logged in user's information. So that's how the information gets passed and bundled up as we generate with the model builder, generate our client object in the controller itself. That's how we're including the email address. And so this is all the standard boilerplate stuff here for everything. The way I have my validation for the phone number and so on and so forth. And that's it. The only other change I did down here is I took out any links. Actually, I take out the div too for that matter, come to think of it. There were links there for going back to the list and things like that, right? No need to do that. All we need to do is create. If we don't want to create, then I'm going to navigate off somewhere else. There's no point trying to look at the details because I didn't create it yet, right? So that's the only real changes in here, okay? Adding this is a key thing, and then I just, cleaned up the way it shows the information, create client profile and so on. Edit is pretty similar. again, edit client profile, right? Edit profile form, again, show that full name. And once more, right up here near the top. Okay, I usually stick it near the validation summary. There's my name value pair in a hidden input type for the email address. Okay. And so I took out, there was of course a form group here for editing the email. I just took that right out. And then back down here, I do have an action link just for back to profile, but of course instead of going to the index, it just goes back to details, where I will retrieve the details for the logged in user, right? Filtering for that same where clause. So that is basically all there is to it. Let's just see it in operation then. Okay, so I'm up on the site. Oh, I've got a return URL because I made the mistake. I shouldn't have been focused on one of the views, right? Okay. Anyway, so I'll log in. That's just fine. So I can log in as let's go with admin1 admin1. There's all the same stuff that we set up last term. There we go. So you can see how this looks a little different. I just say the user address dash menu, the email address, and in my drop down list, there's my default change security settings, right? That's what you got when you clicked on the link previous to the changes we've just made. And that brings up the standard or default, if you prefer to call it that, page here, right? Which you can go in and modify, get rid of some of these things if you don't want to, we don't have external logins or two-factor authentication. You could probably just change it so you go right to change your password as well. But let's just focus on the other option. Here, our manage profile. So I've already actually created a profile for this in my testing earlier, which is why when I do so, remember this calls the details, right? And calling details, it will actually then bring up my client profile for David J. Stovell, right? David Jim Stovell, phone number, everything's shown right there. I can make that a little bigger. And away we go. Now notice I can click edit profile, right? Because hey, it's my profile, I should be able to edit it. No, who said my name was Jim? I'll just take that right out. Save, and now it's a profile for Dave Stovell, and there's my information, right? So that's as simple as that. Now, anytime I go to manage profile, this is exactly what I will get because I've created the profile. Let me log off and log in again. I think I have some users, or I could just register a new user, right? So user 4, I think, was created in the seed data originally. Sure, why not? Okay, so this is a user that there's no client profile existing yet, right? So when I come down here to manage profile, think about what's going to happen in our controller. It's going to direct to, you can even see it down in the status bar at the bottom, client/details, right? So when I go to client/details, okay, notice it says create client profile for, okay, it's using my, because I don't have any of this information yet, so all I really have to show is the email address. But we were redirected to the create page because there was no existing record. So first name for user 4 is fantastic. And of course we still have all our validation, right? If I'd left out anything required. So phone number is required, 905-555-1212. And there we go. I can click create. Notice that, remember I said redirect back to details, right? So here's details for, now it says the name for fantastic, for is fantastic, and I could edit the profile as required. So that is basically it, right? That gives us the ability to maintain, okay, if the profile is not created yet, then we get prompted to create it. From then on, we always get the profile information. We can have as much in here as we want to maintain. We can edit it and so on. Now it's set up to only allow access to the profile for whoever is logged in, right? And that's as simple as that. So we could take this further, obviously, back in your code whenever you require access to all the details from the profile, right? from whoever's logged in. All you have to do is a link query like this, and you can go and get it from the database. Now, perhaps we'll do a follow-up video on this because there are times that if you constantly are requiring information stored in the profile, then we might tuck it away somewhere. There's several options for us, just so we aren't actually going out to the database to get it every single time. If you're constantly pulling this information, why not keep it closer and handier rather than having to get it from the database? So, we can talk about that in a follow-up video. Just to mention now, you could look at things like claims. You could even store the information stored in a cookie. Yes, cookies still work, even with MVC, or even perhaps a session variable as well. But we'll leave that for another day. Okay, hopefully you found this helpful, and I will get this code put back up on the lab file share.